entrepreneurs, and investors, all leveraging innovative digital infrastructure to unlock greater climate action at scale. So these days, I'm working on supporting entrepreneurs and innovators who are developing this new technology, and specifically demonstrating that through pilot projects, so we can show real-world impacts of this tech.
Thanks for joining, Alison. Lucas?
Yes, hi, I'm Lucas, currently based in Berlin. Been involved in the carbon space for about a year and a half, mainly from Block-Size Climate, which is a company based in Frankfurt, using blockchain and market data for financial infrastructure. We've been specially involved in a joint venture project called Verity Tracking, where we are collecting and verifying data through bio-based value chains, and creating digital twins on-chain, creating tokens that represent these assets and carbon credits that are related to it. It's quite important in the case of biofuels and sustainable bioenergy and renewables, and this is mainly where we're active.
Thanks for joining, Lucas. Thibaut, you can go next.
Yes, thank you, Max. Yeah, I'm contributing to this working group with a product and strategy perspective, having a background as a startup product leader, and I've been studying Web3 and blockchain technology as one of the digital innovation that can help reverse nature and climate trajectories at scale. And so analyzing and making sense of the intersection of Web3 and carbon, this ecosystem, with our working group has been for me an opportunity to learn while also producing something that hopefully can be valuable to others. So happy to be here today to start and share what we've been working on.
Thanks, Thibaut. Dan?
Thank you, Max. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Dan. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of EarthChain. And EarthChain is a climate action platform which is designed around the retirement of carbon credits fractionally meaning in quantities that are unequal, less than 1 ton. Our goal is to integrate climate action into everyday processes such as payments. So every time you pay for something, you can also fund a bit of positivity in the world. And we use blockchain to account for those fractional retirements.
Thank you for joining. Thanks everyone for the introduction. Let's get into today's topic. Now, ECOTA, we are a research-based organization. So we want to provide industry stakeholders, policymakers, general public, our audience on YouTube with the best possible knowledge about ReFi, and this with a special focus on tokenized carbon credits. Whether these be the form of, for example, carbon offsets, insets, or emission reports. So we want to add value to the ReFi industry in a neutral and effect-based manner. And this is why, in cooperation with Positive Blockchain, we started a working group on the ecosystem analysis, because we wanted to understand where are projects in this industry coming from? What role do they play in the value chain of tokenized carbon credits? How many tokens are already launched? What layer ones are they using? So we created this working group to scan the entire ecosystem and come up with a database that we can use, but then that also academics can use or venture capitalists can use. And we worked on this database for 2 quarters now, and we have more than 180 projects listed. We are not quite finished yet with the database, but we are ready to present a couple of preliminary findings of the working group. That's why this panel today is a bit different than from our other panels. We wanted to present you some findings and then get into a discussion about what we take from the findings. So to present this, we prepared some slides. Lucas, feel free to share the slides now so that I can start with the presentation and that we can show our audience what we found out during our working group. Yeah.
Okay, you should be able to see it.
Yes, well, we're on slide 6. I don't want to jump right into it. Let me give a brief overview of it. Maybe you go to slide 2, and then we can start. Yes. Okay.
All right.
Thank you. So I think I did already the pitch for ECOTA. Who are we? We are an association. We want to serve as a platform for managers, startups, technologists, industry experts to inform about carbon credits, carbon tokenization, and we want to use the intersection of sustainability and blockchain technology to achieve a net zero future for our planet. On the next slide, if you want to become a ReFi expert, we are launching together with Climate Collective, for example, with the support from Climate Collective, we are starting an 18-week program for the community. So for you guys in the audience to become a ReFi talent or become a ReFi expert, the deadline to apply is on August 19. And you can just scan the QR code. It takes you directly to the application form. So if you want to learn more about regenerative finance and we want to become a ReFi talent, feel free to apply there. The program starts in the mid of September. Some of my colleagues will be presenting, and some of the other faces you saw at ECOTA panels will also be there to present and to share the knowledge. So feel free to join this program. Very proud of that. Now let's get into the working group that we started. This working group is a collaboration with Positive Blockchain. Positive Blockchain doesn't do only climate and environmental data. On the left side, you can see all of the other parts of the ecosystem of our everyday life that Positive Blockchain lists in its database. So we are only a part of the bigger database that Positive Blockchain gives you on the open for free. Just go on the website positiveblockchain.io and you can download the entire database. I personally support very much what they're doing, and I'm very happy that we can give some more granular details on the climate and environmental part of the database. Now, on the next slide, you see 4 faces out of the working group today, but we were actually more than that. So I think we have like 9 or 10 members. You see some of the institutions that members from our working group work at on the right side. So I want to thank every one of them: Alison, Dan, Dorina, Lucas, Mike, Mikhail, Nadine, Thibaut. Thank you for contributing to this. This is your work, not only mine. And I'm very happy that we can achieve our mission at ECOTA, driving value for the industry with neutral and fact-based databases like the one we are sharing today. Okay, I think this is enough for the introduction. Now, Lucas, take it away and show us something of the findings that we have in the working group.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. And I mean, the question that some of you may wonder, how do you start that type of working group and mapping of the ecosystem? You may all be familiar with, articles and lists and online directory and database in the regenerative finance space. The ReFi DAO, which we're also partnering with at Positive Blockchain, are doing great mappings. But we feel like when it comes to the carbon market, there has been such a boom over the past 3 to 4 years that there's so much to learn, and it's very hard to keep track of it. And we didn't find any group that was really focusing on the potential of blockchain and Web3 technologies overall in different areas of the value chain of carbon tokenization. Since it's so important for the nature and the mission of ECOTA, that's what we started to do. So how do you start? Well, on Positive Blockchain, we already had a lot of projects which we could tag as being part of this carbon tokenization or reduction mapping. And obviously, we looked left and right, doing some online research, working with partners. Alison and all the other members of the group, they're also each part of key ecosystems. And so that was really interesting to do that mapping. What were we interesting in? So, I mean, the first scope of the mapping is really to focus on projects and startups that have a role in the tokenization of carbon. And we will see that later on. It can mean different things. And obviously, since it's the European ECOTA Association, further down the road, we definitely want to focus down more into Europe and projects that are in Europe, also from the regulatory standpoint. But we really started with a global mapping. Information we're tracking. So first of all, we are built, so to speak, on the Positive Blockchain database. So the items you see on the left, they are the core data points that we're tracking. Just to know, have a snapshot of these projects and startups. What are there? Are there partnerships? Are there NGO, foundations, startups? When did they launch? Who is the founder? What do they do exactly? Where do they have their headquarters, but also where do they have their servicing operation? On which blockchain are they built? Is it public? Is it private? Is it on Silo, on Ethereum, on others? And did they launch their token, right? Which can also be a way to know what's their maturity. More specific to ECOTA, obviously we looked at a lot of categories which are definitely interesting when you're focusing on tokenization of carbon. First one is the role in the carbon value chain. Are they more focusing on financing? on the data MRV side, on the tokenization of the assets, the trading, or the retiring. What type of projects are they working on? Some projects were purely on forestry, some others on cook stoves, some more in industrial setup, and it was also something quite interesting to dig into that. What type of claims? We also see projects that are focusing purely on carbon removal, some others both carbon avoidance and removal types of carbon credits, but others have other angle and approaches like doing carbon accounting through supply chain, also using the carbon market to go beyond and open the door to new types of environmental credits and eco services, like in the biodiversity space. The token standard, I think we'll discuss it later on, but fungibility, token models, double bridges, are we talking about an NFT or fungible ERC20 token? That's something that's quite important, especially when it comes to traceability and data tracking of the underlying asset. So that's also something we're looking at. You could have, as a project in the Web3 space, tokens for different purposes. A token that represent the carbon credit itself, so expressed in a CO2 unit, either if it's a kilogram or a ton or 1,000 tons of CO2 equivalent, but it could be something else. There are some projects, for example, in the funding space, they're more looking at tokenizing the shares of a project and then offering it as a fractionalized ownership of that project, which will later on generate carbon credits and revenues to the owner. And you could have other types of token for a governance token in a DAO, or also token representing other natural assets like a tree, without this tree being the carbon credit unit in itself. And I think that's something we need to be aware of.
Lucas, I know that we collected a lot of variables, but we only have 45 minutes left today. And we want to talk about the findings, so maybe we skim through this a bit faster. Thank you.
Yeah. So the other aspects, as you can see, the marketplace, methodologies, are they working on existing methodologies or new standard and new approaches, the origin of the credits, and also the regulatory status, where's the token issued and what's the regulatory status. All right, so it's about 180 projects, mainly startups that are listed. In a couple of days, if not days, weeks, you will have actually access to most of the data points on the ECOTA website. And also some of them, the ones that are specific to Positive Blockchain, on the Positive Blockchain project directory, obviously. So we'll make this available. What's really important to mention at that point is that there's only so much that we as a working group and our communities can collect in terms of data. So the main objective of the day is actually to make a call to the ecosystem to help create knowledge and share that knowledge, work together as project developers and Web3 entrepreneurs in that space. So we're really asking for people to fill out a form that will actually help to collect more data and bring that knowledge back to the community. And again, it's the data of what we're mentioning already in the previous slides. A lot of this can be available publicly, where you do internet research, but interviews and forms from the project owners would really help that ecosystem mapping work. All right, and now we are getting into the roles in the value chain, which is, I think, one of the first aspects to the learnings of the mapping. Was really key for us to understand who is doing what in that space, because it can be very different. You can have players that are actually going across the board, but also some of them that are very, very specialized. And maybe to tell you more about some of these aspects and roles in the value chain, we could start with the first one, financing, and maybe Alison, you can pick a few and tell us what they're doing.
Sure, thanks, Lucas. So the role of financiers in this space is to provide much needed funding to projects on the ground, whether that's project developers or sometimes to intermediaries. So a group like Solid World, for example, harnesses the tools of decentralized finance to provide automated matchmaking for carbon projects as a liquidity provider. They also provide forward contracts. So that's before a project gets started, you can have financing in the door to make sure you have the cash to get it up and running. This is really important for project funding because it means that the project developer or the group on the ground doesn't necessarily have to absorb all the financial risk in a project. A group like Green Trade as well is also doing forward contracts on chain.
On the next slide, we have the DMRV for digital measurement, reporting, and verification. This is a key steps for any climate or carbon assets. It's actually the step of collecting and registering data to prove that there's an impact in this specific project. It used to be very traditionally made based on paper reports and surveys, but now we have availability of new technologies, remote sensing, IoT, satellite imageries, which we can actually connect to smart contracts through oracles, which are programs that can read real-world data and create interactions on the blockchain. So there's more to it than just digital MRV. There's also the concept of decentralized MRV. So how do we include more players and stakeholders in a decentralized way with smart contracts to take a role in the MRV processes? Some of the companies in that space, for example, include the Open Forest Protocol. I think it's really one of the a network that is really trying to onboard as many project developers as possible for very low cost, and actually starting with as much as 1 acre of forestry, which is something, if you think about the traditional carbon market, that is impossible because the cost of traditional registry and auditing and verification are simply too high. So they're developing technologies and protocols that combine on-the-field verification by people with as much as a smartphone, and also satellite imagery to monitor the growth of the biomass and the state of that piece of land. Other projects are including DClimate. It's an open marketplace for sharing climate data. They're, for example, partnering with folks in water and flood historical databases, making this data available through Chainlink, which is an oracle, so that anybody can build application and actually read this data. So if you think about carbon credits or insurance product built on the blockchain, there's a great amount of use case for climate data, and some people are really dedicated to building this bridge. And maybe the last one I can mention is Earthbank. One of the interesting approach they're doing is actually to combine the existing credits that are on registries like Vera, Gold Standards, and other traditional registries, and doing MRV on top of them. So kind of doing an additional level of auditing and quality review on existing credits. And we think that's something that's very valuable in the ecosystem. The next one, we have tokenization. And obviously, one thing I want to mention is there are a lot of projects that are involved in the DMRV that are also directly issuing or creating a token. So it's hard to draw the limit in between, but maybe Thibaut, you can tell us more.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas. Yeah, so the tokenization basically consists in creating the tokens, which are the on-chain version of the carbon credits. So as you mentioned, Lucas, before, not all the tokens that have been created by the different groups we analyzed are effectively carbon credits, sometimes a combination of different types of token to achieve that end goal. But basically the end goal is to have carbon credit tokens, which are digital assets that can be acquired, traded, and retired on chain. And basically we see two main trends in this part of the value chain. The first one is first trend is to bridge carbons, what we call carbon bridges, is basically taking carbon credits that have been issued by traditional standard registries and which are stored in their respective databases, and transforming them into carbon credit tokens. So this process is called a bridge. And then we see some groups that have launched two-way carbon bridges, which allow synchronization of off-chain and non-chain registries to avoid double counting and favor price discovery between the different off-chain and on-chain sales channel. One example we can mention here, for example, Toucan has been one of the first one to build a carbon bridge. So this is one approach. And the second approach is the native carbon tokens. So there, instead of bridging existing off-chain assets to on-chain, the carbon credits are directly created as tokens, and usually they're backed by data. And as you mentioned, usually this comes with players that have also some DMRV capacity there. Yeah, basically an example of that could be Chorus, which is doing exactly that, creating an on-chain representation of a project, feeding the data to verify the project, and then creating the carbon credits over time. Yeah.
I think Chorus is a good example. They're actually using Floodlight as a satellite imagery verification third party, connecting to Chainlink to actually issue and verify the CO2 tokens. So yeah, I think it's a good link between both aspects of the value chain. Moving on to the trading, maybe Alison.
Sure. So once these tokens are available, they have some climate impact or performance that they're capturing, and they're ready to be bought and sold. You would go to a marketplace or an exchange to conduct that activity. Kind of the business as usual in the existing carbon market, for example, is a lot of people work with brokers. But now we're seeing a proliferation of more exchanges like Senkin and Thallo and many others who facilitate direct transactions between buyers and sellers, whether those are individuals or companies. They can do B2B or B2C. You see kind of two types of buyers in this market. You have buy to trade actors, people who are buying an asset to sell it on for financial gain, perhaps, or you see people who are more buy to retire actors, as we might call. So someone who's going to buy this environmental asset, this digital environmental asset, essentially to claim that climate performance, that environmental benefit, and retire it from circulation. So these platforms, Thallo, for example, would work with a tokenizer like Toucan to source some credits, to source some tokens onto their platform. They have what's called a two-way bridge. So you can bring credits onto the blockchain or bring them off to take advantage of arbitrage opportunities.
So Alison, why each of these projects on the left, like the DMRV and tokenization, why can't they create their own marketplace individually? What's the difference there?
Well, some do, in fact. So I think one theme that we're hitting on here through our discussion is there's a ton of overlap in this market, right? There's a lot of vertical integration. People seeing that they're specialized in one area and they build out into another function. So you have a group like Chorus who's partnering for the DMRV, doing the tokenization themselves, and then maybe they want to do the direct sale of that, or maybe they want to supply their tokens to someone else to handle sales. Or you could have a multi-pronged strategy where you do direct sales and indirect sales through a partner as well to maximize your sale potential. But the point is that we're seeing a ton of overlap here, and especially between the areas that I've spoken about, trading and financing. Calarius, for example, is also a marketplace. So you can have people who are performing that financing mechanism and tacking that onto a marketplace structure. And I think one reason why we see marketplaces being so popular is it's a very common and ordinary business model that people are already used to. When we talk about onboarding people into Web3 tools, marketplaces are very Web 2. Everyone knows how to use Amazon. They know how to go onto an online portal and buy and sell. So this can be a pretty significant on-ramp for more mass audiences into these tools. I know a lot of them are focusing on B2B to get that scale of revenue at this point, but we're also seeing the front end of those marketplaces, although they're already user-friendly, they want to be even more kind of friendly to folks who are not familiar with Web3 as well. So you may only need to put in an email address to use Thallo, for example. You don't necessarily have to have a Web3 wallet. And that's one way to onboard more people into these technical tools and ecosystems in a more user-friendly way.
Maybe some buyers don't want to deal with 50 projects at a time and look at every individual experience, but they want to have one platform where they source and where maybe these different assets can be aggregated as pool to have more liquidity. So maybe we get to discuss that, but I think
I was just going to say, I think we can do a single panel just on this slide, but we have so much more content to show. So maybe we can hand the mic over to Dan, and then we can, as an example for retiring, because his company is actually listed there. So he's probably the expert to run us through retiring, and then we can move to more quantitative stuff. So Dan, take it away.
Thanks, Max. Yeah, it's clear there's lots of going on and lots of crossover. Just to clarify what retiring is. So retiring is the end stop for a carbon credit. You have to retire it if you want to make a claim. Making a claim means that you are claiming the environmental benefit of the carbon credit. Maybe you're using that for some kind of compensation, or you're using it for your carbon accounting. And so blockchain gives us some exciting and interesting mechanisms which allow us to perform retirement because we have control over the tokens. We can take them out of circulation through authorization mechanisms, or we can burn them. That's to say, completely remove them, send them back to the issuer of the token, and then they're unavailable to trade anymore. So it's a great, real mechanical paradigm for the act of retirement. And we retire so that that carbon credit can't be used again. So it really is the heaven for the carbon credit at the end of its life. On EarthChain, we do fractional retirement. Traditionally, carbon credits are retired at ton granularity. It's the blockchain that gives us the availability or the ability to share the retirement of a ton of carbon among multiple participants, which is important when you're embedding it into something like payments, where you're not talking about tons of carbon. We're working in the kilogram scale. So yeah, I guess that probably covers what retirement is and how we do it.
Thank you. Yeah, and as we already discussed, there are many of these players that have multiple roles. So if you look at the number of roles that are taken by these projects, we see that it really goes across the board. There are actually a lot of projects focusing on DMRV. Obviously, a lot of those that are involving the token issuance itself, right? Whether it's on existing credits or digital. So I think that goes really across the board, and I think we have already discussed it. Maybe in the future we'll see more specialization, and I think we're here to observe it. Yeah,
to add on that point, Lucas, I think this isn't terribly uncommon for a nascent space, right? For a new market to see a lot of overlap. There's a ton of innovation that's occurring. We see a lot of people trying to figure out exactly where their strategic advantage is in the market. So I think it's quite natural to see a lot of vertical integration. And to your point, in the coming months and years, I think we'll start to see more specialization perhaps, and maybe more partnerships rather than that vertical integration that we currently see.
Yeah, I think we had at the time where traditional registry, Vera, stopped the actual bridging of the carbon credits, we saw a lot of new projects that were focusing on tokenizing these existing credits. They could not do it anymore. So they were looking at ways to pivot somewhere else. And by engaging with the people in the space, they realized, well, funding is an issue. And then they pivoted to actually work on that, whether it's with a DAO or a forward contract. So I think we'll keep move left and right.
Maybe if I can add one thing, and I think in terms just of practical in the database, we've tried to embrace that complexity that is currently out there. And so we have not tried to fit one project into one box, but every project has been tagged with multiple labels to really represent closer to what it's actually doing right now. And this will probably move in the future and move quite fast, but we've tried to really stick to that.
The other one is obviously the growth of the market. So what you see here is the cumulated number based on their year of creation, right? And again, based on available data. Here it's a data set of 130 projects. And so some of them already existed in 2017. They were quite early, but today we have 130 and actually more. But for some of them, we don't have the exact date of the year of creation. I think it really shows a boom. All these projects are still active. Some of them we know have pivoted away from using blockchain as well. or working on some other activities. And we can also expect as a new ecosystem that some startup will not exist anymore in the coming year.
Maybe let me give a take on this. One of the things that I hear from institutions all of the time is that regenerative finance basically is a fad that goes up and down, that basically correlates with Bitcoin price. So if Bitcoin goes up, the entire industry goes up, so every cryptocurrency goes up. And then also our industry, the regenerative finance industry, has this, like, its hype cycle, and then comes the bust cycle. Since we have a founder here in the group, maybe you can walk us through when you founded EarthChain and whether that impacted you at all. Maybe you raised in a bull market, for example. Would it be in the same circumstances if you were to found again today?
I think we might be a special case, and I'll explain why. We didn't even care about the market, bull or bear or whatever. It made absolutely no difference to us. We used blockchain because we wanted an instant accounting system that works at fractional scale. We had absolutely no intention of creating a token to sell as a token or a cryptocurrency or anything like that. So I think that the approach that we took isn't really connected to Bitcoin as such. What I can say, though, is that we definitely feel the effects of the ebb and flow of enthusiasm for crypto generally as a space. You can see, trust rising and falling in carbon markets, and you can see trust rising and falling in Web3 and crypto as well, associated with a number of events. Carbon markets, for example, we're looking at events like the Guardian article about certain types of RED Plus projects and credits. Web3, we're looking at things like FTX, and where those two come together in the carbon space is the caution taken by the major registries such as Gold Standard and Vera towards tokenization projects because of their let's say their hesitancy to be associated with the kind of hype cycle that you see in blockchain projects. So I think that does explain some of the flattening actually on the chart there, as we see a bit of a rush going on in 2020 into 2021, and a bit of a pullback due to the change in circumstances. The great news is, though, that the major carbon registries are addressing this. Gold Standard's created the Digital Assets Working Group. We are proud to have been part of that and moving on into their readiness phase as well. And they've been putting together their views by reaching out to the community to create policy and guidelines around this topic, and that will be published in due course. And I think that we can anticipate that the market for on-chain digital carbon assets will then change again. The perspective will change again. We'll see that this is not necessarily directly to be associated with cryptocurrencies and any other speculative activities around that, rather that these are mechanisms that can be used to generate regenerative finance for actual decarbonization projects at higher quality, higher transparency than the existing markets can provide.
And what I'm quite excited to see as well is, as this major registry can make a move with an on-chain registry, we'll also start again see the entire ecosystem of other players that can add to it, come together and hopefully work together. Typically MRV and data providers that can now bring more data through on-chain interaction and smart contracts to tokens that are sitting on a gold standard registry. I think this is an interaction that is kind of closed today or very traditionally ruled, and we can maybe open that up a little bit in a way that it gives a second or a third life to that growing ecosystem.
By the way, then your take was also shared by Alejandro from the audience. They said blockchain is a great vehicle for the VCM. We implemented it and figured that the off-chain processes is equally important in real-world applications. So, I think you have someone in the audience sharing your mindset on this. They actually posted it when Alison talked about the financing part, which is also like Web2 based part of it. So since we only have a couple of minutes left scheduled, I know that we can run some minutes overtime here. But maybe, Lucas, let's go to the next one. And then maybe let's show the layers. So the layer ones that different tokens are working on. So skip the next one, yeah. So.
I assume we can go through these quite quickly, and I think some of it will be published on the ECOTA website together with the data. Yeah. This is based on the country of origin. We'd like to see where the projects are coming from. We see a great number of those in the US, in UK, in Germany, Singapore, Canada. Actually, we have on the next slide also a view on the cities. It's good if you're in that space to know where you can also, get in touch with the ecosystem and with talents and people in that space. So cities like London, Berlin, Singapore, San Francisco are obviously great spots. Will be interesting moving forward for us to have a better understanding of where they are based, but also where they are active and where they source their project from. Are we looking at bringing European-based carbon projects on chain, or is it still going to be the north-south kind of narrative? So these are definitely things we want to keep tracking, and we'll have more trends later on. These are actually not only layer one, I believe, but blockchain platforms that are being used by these projects across the board. There are 32 different blockchain platforms that have been identified. Some of them are multi-chain. Some of them are pretty agnostic, but obviously when they issue the token, it would be on Ethereum layer one or on Polygon, on Silo. So most of them are EVM compatible chains. And we see a great diversity where actually the blockchain platforms and foundations are also very much getting involved into that space, again, through their foundation, also through the intention to offset the emission of their own transaction activity, or maybe the past one. We saw it with the Ethereum during the merge to proof of stake, and now are willing to offset tens of millions of emissions from the pre-merge. So they're also helping to mobilize a little bit more the ecosystems on their blockchain platform.
Lucas, let's stay with this slide for 1 more second. I want to get the panel's thought on the layer perspective here. Thibaut, do you have a take on this? So is regenerative finance an Ethereum land? Because I see Hyperledger there, that's a solution for companies to build up their own chain, for example. I think Cello has a great deal of marketing around attracting ReFi. What do you think? Is ReFi Ethereum based, and will it scale on Ethereum in the future?
Yeah, but I think the figures speak a lot for themselves. Yeah. So I think Ethereum is weighing a lot there, but yeah, I don't think it's mandatory. There are great projects that also build on other chains, and yeah, I think right now it's not really a determinant for me aspect of analyzing the project from this perspective. I think. Yeah, it's more. I've been looking more into like what the value, what is the value, what is the use case that the projects are going after, rather than really the chain. And I think that's what's more important at this stage. That being said, I think some projects are also trying to be influential in the way that they're going to help their network grow. This is something we can keep tracking.
What is it though? Maybe I can hear another opinion on this, because I think Ethereum, you always hear this, hey, if the gas fee spike, for example, I have to pay more for the transaction that is even worth. So, and Polygon, it's a sidechain basically to Ethereum that syncs with it. It has cheaper transaction data, but Ethereum, like the layer one Ethereum, is the biggest one that we observed. So anyone else want to chime in on that?
I think it's going to be about compatibility, like you said. A lot of the projects listed here are EVM compatible, right? And I think what we're going to see more and more moving forward is interoperability of these solutions. That's how we're going to drive the most adoption. That's how we're going to unlock the most liquidity. That's how we're going to achieve the greatest climate impact through these tools, is if they're able to speak to one another, and not through any one layer maxi mindset. We need to be working together and finding ways that we can build tools that coordinate with one another. So I think interoperability is going to be the name of the game moving forward.
Yeah, I think one of the things as well is that projects are still very much immature in that space. If I speak for ourselves, we actually started in 2019 on R3 Corda, and we moved quickly to Ethereum, and now our token engine is issuing on Polygon. And we see a lot of these projects, they may get a grant from a specific ledger or platform, but then later on they realize they actually have to switch. And maybe at some point it doesn't matter for them anymore because they want to be cross-chain anyway. I think this is where it's interesting because some of these blockchain infrastructure providers actually have that climate finance and climate space and carbon space in mind. And again, I would say ones like Silo, but also the Interwork Alliance, Cosmos, Algorand, they're also pretty much focused in that space. And maybe they will allow, what are the use case for project in that space? How can we help them? How can we design the technology around what they will do? Similarly with the region that has built its own ledger, right? I think in the future, we'll see more and more projects move to these chains as they address the needs a little bit closer.
I think it would be interesting as well just to compare Web3 in general on which platforms are adopted versus ReFi on which platforms are adopted. And probably we'll see similar proportions too of just regular DeFi projects distributed in the same way across the chains.
Lucas, thank you for sharing. I think we can go back to the overview because I wanted to take a couple of impulses from the audience. For example, there was Mortuza said that we should make sure that the list is updated because they think that Liquidity isn't operating anymore. And I think this is a great bridge to what one of the challenges that we have in the working group was, because I also see Zenken, for example, they have a new logo. So maybe the people on the panel can give me, you can stop the sharing, for example, because there's only one picture visible. If you share, you can stop the sharing, right? Okay, so how fast-paced is this environment? Do we how often should we have to meet per month, per week to keep this list updated? Any takes on that? What are your takeaways after counting countless rows and analyzing 180 projects?
It's interesting because Liquidity was one of the ones that I looked at, and I actually noticed in preparation as we did the next layer of work in our panel that Liquidity had disappeared. They haven't. They've actually rebranded as Suma, powered by Liquidity. So they're still there. They just have a different brand, somehow a different pivot. But I found that quite a lot of the ones that I had been looking at in my contribution to the working group had changed quite significantly. I ascribe some of that perhaps to, as I described before, the sentiment to perhaps move away from blockchain for certain reasons. A lot seems to have pivoted and talk a lot more about AI now. And I just wonder whether if you're a startup and you're chasing funding and you need a good story to tell your investor, whether you perhaps emphasize and de-emphasize certain aspects of what you do to help to persuade an investor to back your project. There are many others who, yes, they're absolutely still on blockchain, but maybe they don't put it front and center as they would have done before. So it's a nuanced thing. It's an emphasis thing from my point of view.
There's a level of use of blockchain as well, right? There are companies that are very much centralized and they would just, have a site registry to prove the immutability and the non-double counting of certificates on chain, but they are not like a pure Web3 in the sense of, the ReFi and some of the Web3.
Absolutely. That describes us at EarthChain, Lucas, because I would say we're not absolutely 100% Web3. You can buy and pay in a cryptocurrency. You can do it in XLM, in Lumens, but it's not our primary focus.
Yeah, and on the other side of the board, you have some DAOs that are trying to come up, like Solid World and others, projects like Kurest that are trying to achieve full decentralization or open forest protocol. So I think we also see a diversity of projects. For my take is, I'm excited to see what's coming up in the next month, how traditional players are moving, how the market is being educated as well, more and more. How we go maybe use the carbon for other types of ecological and environmental assets, which maybe will turn out to be a much bigger market and will also mobilize many more projects. which will go in the same cycles, right? Pivoting, searching the market, understanding what's the pain point, and I think it's pretty much moving. It's hard to see where the market will be or how it's going to be how it will look like in a year from now.
And I think part of that is because we're at a really fascinating intersection, right? We operate mostly at the intersection of the voluntary carbon market and the blockchain world, Web3 and crypto tools. So both of those landscapes are evolving so intensely right now, some faster than others, but the VCM really is at a turning point right now. There's a lot of evolution in guidelines, in players, in new entrants to the market, in liquidity, and on the blockchain side and on the crypto side, we see a lot of change in regulation too, especially in Europe, and questions about change in regulation in the US, for example. So we're at this niche intersection of these two worlds that are so dynamic. It really was quite a challenge to keep a database like this up to date. And I think if there's one thing that we can say, we can expect that we're going to be in a very different place from now, even in 6 months, let alone a year or more. So yeah, this is a resource that is showing us physically how rapid the space does evolve.
You mentioned regulatory. As we talk about it in the call, it's one of the data points we're interested in. It's one of those on which we have the least amount of data, simply because many projects, they also told us directly, well, we don't know. We don't know yet, or we're in a gray zone, or we're not in the radar yet, or we have yet to clarify it. So I think that would be interesting. In any case, what we're looking to produce with the working group is also periodic reports that may be over periods of 6 or 12 months, and we hope that some of the outputs will be to actually see how the ecosystem is moving and how it's interacting also with the traditional VCM, and how people are working together, and how is the regulatory situation also changing that landscape. So stay tuned for sure.
That was the near perfect closing remarks. I just wanted to thank Mortuza for raising this point, this very valid point. And you see that we had this discussion, our working group, every month. And probably if you were to look into the database tomorrow, just like Alison said, it could very well be a different world tomorrow, because we are at an intersection of two fastly moving parts. So this is why we as an association, we are all doing this in our free time. We wanted to contribute to this with sort of like a monthly or quarterly update. This is what we can provide, but you raised a very valid point that was also a challenge for us in coming up with with what you saw on the slides. But I guess you will be one of the most interested readers in coming up with like the final version of it, and maybe some quarterly reports. So, but I know we are already over time, 5 minutes. So thank you everyone for staying. We are over time, unfortunately, so I have to cut it here. This has been a great discussion, and I know if we present, or when we present the final results in a panel, I will set this probably to 1 hour. Alison, Lucas, Thibaut, Dan, thank you very much for joining, and thanks for being with us today and making this panel such an interesting conversation and coming up with the numbers also for everyone else in the working group. Thanks to everyone in the audience. I hope you enjoyed this event. You can follow ECOTA on LinkedIn and Twitter so that you don't miss any of our upcoming events. If you are an individual, you can join ECOTA as an expert or fellow. You can also register or apply for our ReFi Talents program. Would love to have you there and would love to teach you and talk more about this industry. If you're an organization, you can join us as an institutional member and work with us together to decarbonize our future with the help of blockchain technology. You can just visit ecota.io, and there should be a button right at the top of the page where you can apply for both. If you are a project and you looked at the panel today and said, hey, my project would be fitting our criteria, for example, and there is outdated data, maybe you saw the map, you can click on the link in the pinned comment on this live stream. There is the form that Lucas showed you during our presentation. You can register your project or say, hey, there's outdated data, please update this and this, and we will acknowledge this. So feel free to do this. And that was it from my side. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the entire panelists for coming up with the data and for talking us through. today. And I'm very happy to see you again when we launch the V1.0 of this, and looking forward to working with you on analyzing this and providing value to the regenerative finance industry. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks very much.